to Tramlines, a podcast from Agrii. I'm your host, Tony Smith, putting your questions to the experts. In this episode, I am talking about the future of agronomising nutrition with Agrii's Fertiliser Technical Manager, Tom Land, and Jamie Lyttle, who is Fertiliser Product Manager with Agrii. Today, we're going to be looking at the question, what does agronomising nutrition actually mean? And how can this help growers produce sustainable and, of course, importantly, profitable crops? So let's start off by finding out from you guys, what does your job title mean? What do you actually do in your day job? So, Jamie, let's start with you. You're a Fertiliser Product Manager. What do you do?
So my job within Fertiliser Product Manager is really everything fertilizer. It's everything from looking at farmer soil samples to selling fertilizer and incorporating the whole agronomising nutrition package for our customers.
And you also get really heavily involved in nutrition plans, don't you?
Yes, that would be one of my main jobs through the winter months, from sort of October all the way through right the way through to January, making blends and grades for farmers to tailor make to their cropping requirements.
Brilliant, and I'd like to hear a bit more about that later on, so we'll come back to you on that. And which part of the country are you based?
So I'm based covering the Lyttle, Shropshire area, as well as covering Derbyshire and up into Staffordshire and Leicestershire.
So quite a large geographical area. Let's come to you, Tom. So you're technical manager for fertilisers. What does that entail?
Yeah, hi Tony. It entails quite a bit, really. I have a job role very similar to Jamie, but another part of my role is the sort of technical side of fertilisers and crop nutrition. So I spend a lot of my time looking at what we can do to develop products for the future, and also test products that are they going to do what they say they do, and are we going to get more use efficiency out of products as well? So a lot of R&D based activity and a lot of activity out in the field, dealing with customers and dealing with guys who are putting together our trials and our R&D projects. Very
interesting. So there's a lot going on there. But let's start with that big question. Agronomising nutrition. Well, what is that, Tom? What does it actually mean?
It's a very flash word for meaning. We can just put a bit more effort and focus into the basics of crop nutrition. We can take crop nutrition and make it as technical and also quite confusing as people like, but we can take it from a simple level and make it more practical and applicable to the grower in their own geography and growing systems as well. So it doesn't need to be anything too complicated, but it's more focusing the nutrition and tailoring it to the grower and their needs.
Yeah, and focusing that nutrition is something, when I spoke to you, to both of you before today, was something you were both really passionate about getting right for your grower customers. Let's just start there with a couple of principles. From the point of view of getting nutrition right for a crop, I know you both talked about getting the soil health right. Tell me a bit more about why is that starting block so important? Maybe Tom, you'd like to start with that.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I mean, soil health is a hot topic at the moment, of course. But we have always known that if you improve soil health, you improve the use efficiency of the fertilizers you apply. You potentially got the ability to reduce the fertilizers you apply, and even you might change your decisions on what fertilizers you decide to use along the way as well. So soil health is the fundamental starting point. We've all got one common goal, and that's understanding the soils better, and in turn that will help us understand how we can utilize fertilizers better as well.
Yeah, and Jamie, I mean, how do we actually get to understand soil health? What do we need to be looking for? What can we analyse? How do we get that full understanding?
Well, there's sort of some key areas that we need to look after in terms of our soils. Looking into the soil analysis and soil indices and soil tests that we're doing, everything from looking down through soil beta tests to looking into active carbon, as well as looking into your organic matter, and a good seed carbon to nitrogen ratio is key.
Yeah, absolutely. It is the foundation. I can see that. Interestingly, this morning it's very, very heavy rain outside where I am today. I'm down in the southwest of England, and really heavy rain. In fact, also a lot of hail. So it just shows where the temperatures are at. How important is getting that soil health right in terms of helping that crop get away in the spring, even after a difficult dry spell that we've had and cold temperatures?
That's a really good point, Tony. It's hugely important because the weather patterns we seem to have now is we tend to get feast and famine with either rainfall or extremely dry conditions. And if you've got good soil health, or you're improving your soil organic matter levels, you hopefully can mitigate the effects of the weather and potentially climate change as part of what you're doing, because we know that the dry weather conditions have impeded nitrogen use efficiency. Certain fertilizers would have been lost to the atmosphere due to volatilization, so their efficiency has declined. So are we having to spend more money and apply more fertilizers, or should we have applied the right fertilizer at the right time and the right product?
And that must be a really difficult question on farm. I mean, Jamie, we were talking earlier about your nutrient plans, but you can do all that planning. But then, of course, just as Tom said, we come into a spring like we've got this year. Farming, everything changes. We're dependent on that weather, aren't we? So what can an agronomist do now? What can a grower do now to react and help nurture that crop through these next few weeks?
In terms of looking at what the current crop is within the ground and what their cropping requirements are in terms of phosphate and potassium is sort of key. Looking at a standard winter wheat crop of 8 tonne a hectare on an index of 1 of P and K, that crop will require 90 kilos of phosphate and 75 kilos of potassium. One of the key things that we are looking at, due to the weather and the climate and the conditions that we're seeing through these winters that are quite harsh, is to make sure that these crops have readily available phosphate and potassium within the spring. And some of these nutrient plans are changing in terms of, instead of applying autumn applied TSP and MOP, it's applied in the spring. There's also other things within the dry weather conditions that we had within the last little while, looking at foliar nitrogen and then topping it up with sort of long chain urea polymer products. All of these type of things to feed the crop that we have is vital once we come out of those winter months, especially on the harsh weather conditions that we had last autumn. In terms of crop establishment, wasn't exactly what you would call brilliant across the country. So it's all about trying to keep those tiller numbers, that have survived after the winter months, and ensuring that those tillers that we have are kept in a really good condition and are fed the right nutrients.
So coming back to that question, what is agronomising nutrition? It is exactly what I can hear you talking about, is making sure that crop has exactly what it needs to be able to reach its best potential, but then also making sure that that's done according to how that crop's developing, also as we come into that early spring. Am I right in understanding that?
Yes, that would be 100%. It's everything from looking at your tiller numbers within the spring to looking at what nitrogen, in terms of nitrogen testing, what nitrogen is within those in those crops at certain times. What nitrogen does that crop require? Have you fed it the right phosphate and potash, and sort of looking at everything from a what is the yield potential of that crop to what nutritional requirements does it have?
Yeah. And we've mentioned it a couple of times without going into any detail, but these nutrition plans that I know you're both very, very involved in. In fact, share a little bit about the acreage or the hectareage that actually you advise on, because it's quite staggering. Well, I thought it was staggering. Tell me, chaps. So, Tom, I mean, what is a nutrient plan, and sort of what sort of acreage are you guys advising on with those?
Well, I'll cover the nutrient management plan parts. A nutrient management plan is obviously a key requirement for growers in terms of something to have at the start of the season. What their intentions are, taking account of very standard things in terms of previous cropping, soil type, geography, rainfall, any previous manures or anything like that. But it's a really good starting point to say, this is our plan. Are we going to stick to the plan, or are we going to go off plan due to maybe weather conditions or crop potential? So I can't emphasize how important a nutrient management plan is, and how important it is that you actually revert to the plan through the growing season and decide, are you sticking, are you twisting, so to speak, in terms of, do you alter the nutrition you're applying due to the crop conditions and the weather conditions at the time. We've also got to highlight that nutrient plans are important for compliance, but also they are hugely beneficial in terms of understanding crop offtakes and nutrient utilization, not within a 12-month period, but also within, say, a full crop rotation as well.
Right, okay. So very involved. So they're not just one piece of information in isolation. It's part of a whole picture of a farm, or as you said, a rotation. Jamie, give us some insight. I mean, is this a secret? I don't know, but what sort of area are you guys advising these nutrition plans on?
So within the sort of Lyttle and Bartonfields region, we probably would average about 50,000 hectares worth of nutrient plans. It's quite a large quantity that we look after. One of the main sort of things that drove me very much down this route is there's a number of different types of fertilizer that is out there on the market. You've got straight fertilizer, which is just straight elements in on their own. Or, for example, when I was starting to get involved within these nutrient plans, I was finding that, a lot of this could be done, coming up with bespoke grades. And looking down that bespoke grades, one of the key things that drove me down this route was, coming up with these bespoke grades, but also I've created a cost calculator, which gives us and the farmer the ability to create a grade that is tailor-made, and a prescriptive applied fertilizer tailor-made to that farm. But it also makes it quite a lot cheaper per hectare than using straights, because of the number of passes that you can cut out and that you can reduce. Obviously, in tail, that will improve your carbon footprint and reducing your number of passes, obviously reducing your diesel and your fuel, and increasing your efficiency of having more time available.
So if I'm understanding that correctly, from that nutrient plan, you're also able to then recommend, supply, obviously, is that bespoke blend. So the farmer's getting exactly what they need for that particular crop or field, but also that can help them in turn reduce their costs of actually applying those nutrients as well. So we've got that real commercial benefit. Have I got that right?
Yeah, very much so. A lot of them that I've done this year, we've had a huge cost saving per hectare by applying a prescriptive grade fertilizer tailor-made to suit that farmer's requirements. Because obviously going across a field 5 or 6 times using straights is in some cases, especially on mixed farms, isn't always economically viable, because their time is sort of quite valuable in terms of if they're a dairy farm.
Yeah, and we were talking before that actually you can do a bespoke blend down to quite a relatively small area, can't you?
Yes, it can be done on a very, very small area, sort of anything from 80 to 90 acres. It's just ensuring that sort of we meet our minimum order quantity in order to produce that grade.
Yeah, very good. And Tom, this is something that sort of I'm thinking on behalf of our listeners here. So where a grower is already doing a really good job in terms of getting their nutrients specifically tailored to that crop, is there still room to improve the performance of the crop and the financial benefit? Is there still room to get even better at what we're already doing well?
Yeah, I think there is, actually. I think there's always an opportunity to improve. And I think that's where you have to complete the circle a little bit here as well. And that's where looking at retrospectively at previous years in terms of either what helped performance of the crop or what impeded performance of the crop. But one thing we conduct as a business is grain analysis. And grain analysis is a really good way of actually taking a look back and saying, how well did that crop utilize those nutrients that were applied? How efficient was the nitrogen use from the fertilizer? in order to complete that, you really do need a soil mineral nitrogen sample at the start of the season and grain analysis at the end of the season. And then from that, you can fairly much calculate how efficiently, particularly nitrogen, but also the relationship to nitrogen and sulfur as well, in terms of did you apply enough sulfur to the crop that season? And you can then start to make changes for the forthcoming season. One thing we've been picking up is low phosphorus concentrations in grain, and phosphorus is hugely important for the fertility of the following crop. So if you're looking to keep that grain, for example, for a seed crop, or the fertility of your next crop you're growing, then maybe we should be thinking about how we can improve the phosphorus use efficiency in that crop. Now, that might be anything from using fertilizers that have products that increase phosphorus availability, like P Reserve, or even considering applying foliophosphates or foliophosphites to the crop during the growing season to help improve that transportation of phosphorus within the plant.
Okay, so that's really interesting, that loop back to review in order to be able to take a step forward for the next crop. I want to move on because we've got so little time and you guys have so much knowledge. Tom, can I ask you, what top tip would you give to growers about what they should be thinking about right now that can help them with the crop that's in the ground, but also thinking about your points about looking ahead?
Yeah, so we're probably somewhere between growth stage 31 and 37 in cereals, depending on where you are in the country. We're probably not yet at growth stage 37, but it'll be upon us fairly shortly. So we're probably coming to the end of our nitrogen applications. People may have held off because of the dry weather. I would encourage anybody who hasn't yet finished applying their fertilizer to get all the nitrogen fertilizer they planned or intended to apply onto the crops now while we're getting some moisture. That's hugely important in terms of helping the crop finish growing some biomass. The other things to consider as well is thinking about your soil nutrient status in relation to micronutrient strategies, for example, as well, because you're coming at up to a period where the flag leaf is probably going to have one of the biggest contributions to yield. And if you're thinking about where do I make the biggest investment, it's probably around about flag leaf stage in terms of trace elements. And you can use your soil analysis that you took at the start of the season to formulate maybe how you might put together some foliar nutrients that you'd want to treat that crop with.
Yeah, valuable advice indeed for growers right now in season. And Jamie, I know you said that today you're going to be doing quite a lot of planning. What are you thinking about looking slightly further ahead?
Well, looking into the future, obviously one of the other hot topics that's around about at the moment is the discussions around urea. And one thing that I would look into is I would definitely be looking at those urea users who are using straight urea. I would be looking at exploring the options or the ideas of using protected ureas and ureas with inhibitors on them, as well as if you look down the liquid side of things, obviously there is products out there that reduce volatilization and denitrification. There is a huge amount of changes that are going to happen within farming in the next 5 to 10 years. And what I would say is sort of be on the front foot of those type of things rather than being caught out on the back foot. It's probably better to be proactive rather than reactive.
Well, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Jamie. You clearly have so much expertise in this field, and thank you very much for that really interesting insight looking at agronomising nutrition. Agronomy solutions that will and can deliver really tangible financial and environmental benefits very quickly, I think, when adopted on farm. That's it for this podcast, but do tune in again as we meet the experts throughout the season, exploring the many immediate and longer-term questions for growers and farmers in the UK. If you have any questions that you would like us to ask the experts, email info@agrii.co.uk. See you next time.